Hello, and welcome to episode 11, all about the Council of Elrond, chapter 2, book 2 of Fellowship of the Ring, being the 11th part of That's What I'm Talking About. Hello, my name is Mary Clay. If that's too complicated for you, just call me MC. And today I am joined by Buddy Duquesne and Alice White of Those Happy Places. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, listeners, I actually got connected with Buddy on Twitter because several weeks ago I tweeted asking about who owns the rights to Lord of the Rings and why the heck there isn't a theme park yet for Lord of the Rings, because it seems so like self-intuitive that there should be one. And then you replied with like a glorious thread of just all these ideas.
Yeah, that's a Twitter hobby of mine, is when I get an idea and I really want to expand on it, I write what should probably be on another website, but in tweets, and it goes on for way too long. And thank you for your patience with that. If it sent a bunch of notifications your way, I do apologize.
It was like a multi-day adventure watching Buddy tweet about a Lord of the Rings theme park. It was he's very good at it.
It was so great. I was like, someone needs to like, have you guys like, listeners, for those of you that don't know, their podcast is about theme parks and just talking about why don't you guys explain it?
Well, Those Happy Places, we like to say, is the podcast that treats theme parks, rides, and attractions like literature. There's a lot of design and a lot of work that goes into making theme parks and theme park rides, but they don't seem to have a space like movies and books do, where you can like analyze them or talk about the symbols and the meanings and the effects that they use. And so we decided to create that space where we could take a ride or an aspect of a ride and break it down into parts and explain how effective it is in telling stories.
Yeah, and sometimes we talk about little things like one moment in one ride, or sometimes we just talk about one ride or attraction, and sometimes we talk about the really big things. Our most recent episode is about rainbow capitalism and its relationship to the Disney parks, and that is a doozy of an episode, and kind of one of our largest conceptually. And a smaller one was like about Star Tours and how much we really like it. So it's kind of a whole range of like academic to less academic and more singularly focused in general.
Yeah, it's not just Disney either. We do Universal and Six Flags and Knott's Berry Farm and all sorts of theme parks and just the general idea of a themed space. So that's what we talk about. So that's why when as big Lord of the Rings fans, when somebody said on Twitter, "What about a Lord of the Rings theme park?" Buddy just went, "Oh, I know what to do," and just tweeted like crazy. It's like a combination of some of our favorite things.
Yeah, I think my favorite part is the Mordor ride is just always closed because you can't go into Mordor.
You can't walk into Mordor.
You cannot simply walk into Mordor.
Yeah, like that would be probably like the most epic ride there, but I love the gag of, well, you can't go in there because you just cannot simply walk into Mordor.
Whatever you're imagining in the Mordor ride is true about the Mordor ride, and that's why you can never ride it, because that would just collapse it into one possibility. It's a quantum ride, and that's the point.
Yeah, so normally this is where I would ask an internet question, but this chapter is so dense that I'm going to skip that today. But if you have a fun question or a topic or whatever that you want discussed on the podcast, you can send a DM to Twitter or Instagram at TolkienAboutPod. So jumping into this chapter, this is chapter 2 of book 2 of Fellowship of the Ring, the Council of Elrond. And I told one of my friends, I think it was this morning or yesterday, I was like, so I just finished Council of Elrond. And she goes, oh, so you got over the hump.
It's a really good way to put it.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
And Buddy, you were talking about how you started reading the book and then gave up here, right?
Well, yeah, as my backstory about like my expertise might imply, I read a lot when I was a kid, and I thought I could handle any book. And I picked up The Hobbit and blew through it in like a couple of weeks. And then I was like, okay, I'm ready to read the real ones now, right? Because The Hobbit's like a prequel and simpler. And this is the chapter that stopped my first read through of the Lord of the Rings books. This one, I just could not do it. Too many characters in one place, too many descriptions, too much history, too many, too much foreshadowing for things that later would become significant, but for now sound like nothing.
Yeah.
And I remember very specifically reading like a paragraph about Legolas's cloak and how it was different than the other elves' cloak, and being like, I can't keep reading this. And that's a shame, because listening to it today as an audiobook in preparation for this episode, this chapter rather, is off the chain. It's really good.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Also, the audiobook is the link that you tweeted to the version of it on YouTube. That's the correct version, listeners. That's the version you should listen to.
It's so good.
I mean, granted, I have not listened to the other version of the audiobook that's on Audible, but this version of the audiobook is amazing because it mixes in pieces of the soundtrack from the movies and the voice, narrator, actor. I don't know what you call an audiobook narrator, but he's amazing, and it's just perfect.
Yeah, it even seems like there's multiple voice actors kind of cut in and out, and there's just really great deliveries on a lot of lines. And it made a lot of the things about this chapter that make it so dense as text really gripping because of the performances.
Yeah. So, chapter 2 kicks off with Frodo feeling much better from his near-death experience.
He's ready for anything.
Yes. In fact, he wants to go, like, he makes a comment to Gandalf that he wants to go, like, frolic in the trees in the mountains. He's like, it's such a nice day. Can't I go for a walk? And Gandalf is like, we have this matter of an evil ring that we have to deal at right now. So maybe you can go climb trees later.
Well, the hobbits are notoriously bad at knowing the urgency of a situation, right?
Yes.
All the way through the book so far, they have been like, we can rest here for a couple of days. What's the harm? And this is just another example of that. Usually Frodo's the serious one, though, isn't he?
Yeah, but I think a near-death experience will really bring anyone to be like, wow, I just want to enjoy my life right now. And I
like
find
really
it,
run in a stream. And
yeah, I really like the
exactly.
line, I feel ready for anything, because he's sitting there like, I'm ready for anything, and he does not really know what he's getting up to, does he?
Well, this is the chapter where Frodo implies that his journey is over, and he's like, well, that's the end of my story.
Yeah. Well, in the previous chapter, when he wakes up from his near-death experience, he actually, I don't know if he says it out loud or if he just thinks it, but he's like, I think I've had enough adventure. I'm ready to go home now. And Gandalf is like, oh, child.
Oh, honey.
You have so much more left. And also just like talking about the hobbits not knowing when something is urgent. In, I think it's between chapter 2 and 3, Gandalf has told Frodo that the ring is evil. It needs to be destroyed. And Frodo's like, okay, cool. We'll leave the Shire at once. And then it time jumps like 4 months later, and he's still just sitting there. Like,
and Gandalf was like, I said soon.
Yeah.
You heard that part.
Yeah. But that is so soon for a hobbit. Like, that is like, it's 4 months. That's like not enough time to plan, he says. Like,
yeah.
I need like at least a year. And because that's how hobbits roll, man.
Yeah. And he also had to wait for his birthday to be over so he could have one last hurrah. So then we go into the bell rings, the official bell for the Council of Elrond, and they walk in, and we are introduced to, I think, like all of the characters that are left in the series.
So many.
Yeah, and it's so funny because the whole first half of the book, I've been like, okay, when are we going to meet some new people? Let's get this ball rolling. And we met Aragorn / Strider, and I was thrilled. I was like, all right, we've added another person to the party. Let's do this. We are introduced to, so they walk in and they're introduced to a younger dwarf. Editor's note. I did not listen to the audiobook of the previous chapter, and that episode, which hasn't come out at the time of recording this, but will be out at the time that this comes out. Anyway, we had a whole conversation about like, yeah, it's definitely pronounced Glowin because the accent is on the O. And then in the audiobook, it's pronounced Gloin. So
definitely Gloin. Yeah.
Yeah, as longtime knowers of how it was said out loud in the movie, we can confirm that it was Gloin.
Okay.
The son of Gloin is how he's introduced in the it's if you hear it from the film or how I remember my first introduction to Gloin would have been the animated version of The Hobbit, the like 1970s animated Hobbit, where they introduced all of the Hobbits in a row.
I cannot wait to look those up when I'm done. I'll read all of the books first, and then I'll do the movies, I guess. And then I want to do that cartoon series. If it's still out there, I want to do it because all I've seen are like insane looking screenshots or pictures from it. I'm like, this looks great.
There are phenomenal, very cool things about all of the animated things, especially the Bakshi. I think that's Fellowship and Two Towers that Bakshi did, right? Those are really good.
He did Return.
Did he?
I think so.
Oh, okay.
And The Hobbit. He does. I'm pretty sure he does them all. And some of them are just so... Yeah, some of the character designs are so out there. But The Hobbit is easily the best one. And the songs that get written for it are so good. It's very excellent. And that really does help with pronunciation because you meet Gloin. And in here you've got also... They reference Balin and Dwalin as well, who are also members of the Hobbit party from The Hobbit.
They're important.
The dwarves have interesting names.
Yeah. So they introduce Gimli, which I didn't remember was a name that I remembered from the movie until I read it. So I was like, okay, that sounds familiar. There's Aristor, the chief, Galdor is an elf. And then, of course, there's our homeboy, Orlando Bloom, Legolas.
Legolas is here. He's in the house.
Thank
God.
To save us from all of this.
Yes. And then there's also a bunch of other characters that have names that I don't want to try and pronounce right now. Oh,
sure, you got the important ones.
Yeah, and then there's Boromir.
Oh, Boromir is pretty important. I mean, he's not actually important, but him thinking that he's important is important. I was going to
say, he seems very sure of himself for someone who maybe shouldn't be so sure of himself.
Yeah.
I was kind of thrown away reading this with like really kind of like thrown off or blown away, not thrown away. I was really puzzled because they introduce him as just a man of the South, Boromir, but he's the son of the Steward of Gondor. Like he is an important dude.
He's kind of a big deal, but I think the council, the way that it's written kind of emphasizes how not a big deal he is on this scale, if that makes sense.
Prejudice against men, honestly. Like,
for sure.
They're like, oh, well, we're elves and dwarves and wizards and hobbits. Like, oh, you're just a man? All right.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that I'm assuming that anyone who is currently at this meeting is a big deal. Like, yes. They have to be pretty important, I think, to be here listening to all this and catching up on the whereabouts of the ring. Which I will say, if this chapter is like, it's like one of those episodes in a sitcom where the episode starts at like the end of the events from that episode. And then you kind of like trace back what happened beforehand that led all of the characters to like start fighting at the party or something, to be like, I don't know, freeze frame. Yep, that's me. I bet you're wondering how I got here. Yeah. And it keeps, I'm thinking in particular of, there's this episode of How I Met Your Mother where it shows like what happens. It's a party and it shows what happens in the dining room, what happens in the living room, and what happens in the kitchen. I don't know what y'all's thoughts and feelings are on that show.
The episode that I kind of come back to is a Community episode, where they're constantly remembering different things that they've done throughout the year that don't necessarily connect directly to the current events, but that kind of establish a history and an attitude, the way that the groups would work together, kind of.
Yeah, it's like a clip show episode. Yeah. It's called Paradigms of Human Memory, and it's I love Community. It's a clip show episode where they keep flashing back to things that have already happened, but none of the things that they flash back to happened on the show. Yeah. It's just like it's filling in the blanks of like extra things that we know now that they've gotten up to between episodes, and it fleshes out their connection and their history and stuff like that. And that the idea of shows using this technique, that this literary technique of like non-linear storytelling. Gandalf gets like 17 pages in this chapter. Gosh.
And he like ends his tale by saying like, apologies for talking so long. I'm going to stop now. And everyone's Tolkien. Like, thank you.
Like, thanks, he knows. Tolkien knows. God. He's like, I have made my story too long. And I'm like, you think? Like, you could have maybe summed that up like, by the way, Saruman's bad now.
Yeah. And so the meeting kicks off with this line that I highlighted that says, not all that was spoken and debated in the council need now be told, which means that there's even more that happened at this meeting that we don't read about. So,
absolutely.
Good Lord, I can't even imagine how long this chapter would be an episode if he included everything.
When I was listening to the audiobook, I was doing a little research, and apparently a quote from Peter Jackson said that this could have been its own movie, just this chapter. Like, he could have really gone for it and included every character and what they said and what they did. And in the movie, it is, 20 minutes almost, the Council of Elrond? It's pretty long. There's these flashbacks are in there, though they're not as robust as these.
Yeah. Anyway, so the first thing of substance that we kind of hear about or get an update on is Gloin, as I'm now going to have to force myself to say, gives us an update about honestly, I can see how this chapter really could be like, at least if it was like a TV series, the section where Gloin is talking about what happened in the dwarf version of this event, and on their side of like, this could be a whole episode of him talking about what happened with the dwarves, and then Gandalf talking about what happened with them, and then Aragorn, and then anyway, so Gloin says basically that a servant or a writer came from Mordor to try and make a deal with the dwarves to give up information about the hobbits in exchange for the dwarf-made rings from yesteryear or whatever. And they know that the dwarves, or assume, I guess, that the dwarves know something about hobbits because of, I'm assuming because they know that some of the dwarves had adventures with Bilbo back in the day. Which I have not read. If I could go back and start this podcast from the beginning, I might just start with The Hobbit, because there truly is a lot, especially this chapter. There's a lot of like, and then Bilbo recounted his adventures that need not be recounted here. And I'm like, well, I'd like to hear a little bit, please.
Some details at all. I think it's not that important, other than to know that Bilbo went on a pretty successful adventure, and that he's a little bit famous for it.
I've got the gist of it,
and a little bit way rich too.
Yeah, a lot of it way rich,
but he I think like
he's a little way rich, famous, and actually there's this really cute bit right at the end of this chapter where Bilbo says, all right, fine, I guess you're talking about me, I guess I'll go. And Boromir starts laughing, and then realizes that everybody's taking Bilbo dead seriously, which I think is the most precious thing. Because Boromir doesn't know anything about hobbits. He didn't even know what a halfling was. And then, so the fact that everybody takes the halflings really seriously is just so fun.
Yeah.
Bilbo's almost legendary,
especially Bilbo, because he's very famous.
With some of the council, he's almost legendary, and he's at least known to most of them. And I think everybody there knows that his offer is not that serious, but out of respect for his past exploits, they're like, yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
And it's also, when we get to that point, it's also like, I don't know. It's like a joke, and I don't know why I keep referencing sitcoms, but I guess that's my language or whatever today is speaking through sitcom tropes.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's like a joke about like, and I think we all know who's going to be prom queen. And then it's like, all right, I'll nominate myself for prom queen. It's like, no one was talking about you. We were talking about Sherry, obviously. And it feels like that. We're at the end. Bilbo's like, okay, obviously the halfling we're talking about is me, so I'll go. And I think it's either Gandalf or Elrond or someone is like, no, it's not you.
Yeah, well, and Gandalf gives him, he says, like, listen, of course you want to go. We totally get it, but you know you cannot. You know better.
It's such an easy out. Like, he's just like, Bilbo, yeah, you'd totally be great, but you got this book, my dude. You got to write your book. Yeah. And Bilbo's like, oh, fine. I guess I won't go on this adventure. But my nephew, he's pretty good.
Nah, he lets Frodo speak for his own self. It's my favorite part of this chapter. Yeah. But we can get there. We're not
quite there yet.
So we get this update from Gloin that, they were given an offer to give up information about the hobbits in exchange for the dwarf rings, which probably wouldn't serve them any good use if they got the rings back anyway, because they would just be under the command of Sauron. So I'm assuming they turned that offer down. And then, this is also, I don't know if I knew this, or I don't know if I already knew this, or if this is something that like was said or told earlier in the book and I just skimmed over it or didn't remember. But the rings were forged in the Second Age. And currently, there is the Lord of the Rings Amazon Prime series in the works, and there are rumors, supposedly, that the series will be about the Second Age. So, I don't know. I just think that's interesting for my brain to make those connections, that like, oh, that's why people are thinking maybe it's in the Second Age, because that's when the rings were forged. That's when this huge thing kind of began.
Yeah, so the fun thing about the ages is that they the length of the ages are very variable. An age is not a set amount of time. I do believe that like the Second Age was thousands of years. Like, yeah. So there's a lot of time period to cover in the Second Age. But according to, and now I don't remember how it's stated in the book, but according to my memory of the film, is that that the ring after Isildur lost it was missing for 2,500 years, I think. Yeah, 2,500 years, and then Gollum had it for another 500 years. So yeah. So it has been fully 3,000 years since the events of the rings being forged, or longer. And I also heard that the Amazon series might be about Aragorn, and that dude, he's only 80. Yeah. So I don't know if they're going to cover all of the events
and all of this about the series is just like rumors and talk going around the internet, because the only things I think that we know are the team that they've assembled, because they released this very fancy video going through the writers and the creators, and there's like some people from Game of Thrones and some other fantasy series, and then there are some Tolkien experts, there are people from the original films, and then the other piece of news is that, what's his name? Oh, I cannot remember his name. It's the kid from We're the Millers.
He's so good.
Was cast in it. And he has a weird looking face, and he's was in
the most fabulous eyebrows.
And he was in one of the Narnia movies. Will Poulter, that's it. That's his name. Will Poulter. And some people were doing side by sides of, I think, him currently, and then I think a young version of the actor who played Elrond. And apparently they look similar, and they're like, a young Elrond, perhaps. And I'm like, no, I don't see it. Like, they're gonna have to do a lot for me to not see him as the kid from We're the Millers.
Here's the problem is that if Elrond looks like Hugo Weaving, then young Elrond just looks like Hugo Weaving. Like he's
Hugo Weaving was at the battle. He was with Isildur at the battle.
Oh, true.
He's because elves are ageless, and he just has looked like Hugo Weaving probably since the day he was born.
Yeah,
he just came out looking like Hugo Weaving.
Yeah, I was gonna say, question, like, how because elves are like, they don't, do they age, but they're eternal, or they have, I mean, not eternal, immortal, so they don't die. So that implies, so are they just like ever aging? Are there elf babies? And if there are elf babies, how did the babies grow? If the elves are constantly described as being ageless,
right? They don't age at all. And I think are
they just born old people?
I think they grow up, but we don't see elf babies in the story, and I think it's because all the elves are leaving, and that's brought up a couple of times in the book so far, that the elves they're on their way out. The number of elves is actually always going down. Meanwhile, the number of men is always going up because they're actively multiplying. And I think elves are kind of done with that. Alice maybe knows more about this than I do.
There is almost nothing known about elves and like how they grow up. You can't even just go by like the movies because they all look like Hugo Weaving or Liv Tyler or Orlando Bloom. They're all like full grown adults, but none of them get any older than like 50 or however old Hugo Weaving was when they filmed it. It's impossible. There's no way to know.
Elrond is one of the oldest elves, though. Like, yes, he's been
around
longer than many of them.
Yeah, and I think Frodo asked him to, like, at one point he's talking about the battle where Isildur cuts off someone's hand and gets the ring.
Yep.
That was Sauron's hand.
Yeah.
Was it Sauron? Okay.
Yeah. Isildur cuts the ring off of Sauron's hand.
Yeah, and steals and Frodo's like, you were there? And
3,000 years before. Yeah.
I am pretty old, so yeah. Or no, Frodo says something like, you remember that? And he's like, I mean, yeah.
Yes,
I'm an elf.
I was there when the courage of men failed.
I was there 3,000 years ago. Yeah, I can hear it in his voice. It's so good. Isildur, destroy it.
Oh man. The thing is that this whole scene in the movies is so iconic. We've already said lines from it that aren't really in the book. Like from before when we were talking about Boromir, like he doesn't say one does not simply walk into Mordor in this, and it devastated me.
I was waiting for it. I was waiting for it.
And some of these flashbacks are the same way for me. Like Elrond shouting, Isildur, destroy it! But like, it's not there in the story, is it?
It's not. But he does say in this chapter, Elrond cites his lineage of like the highest elves. Like Erendil is like the highest elf, and with connections to Beren and Luthien as well. He says I've seen 3 ages in the west of the world, and many defeats and many fruitless victories. So like Elrond's been around for 3 whole ages. We're in the 3rd age now. Like he's been around since always.
Yeah, he's seen some Shire.
He knows the lore, though, right?
Yeah. And also we get in I think it's the previous chapter. What's her name? The lady elf, Arwen.
Love Arwen.
That's it. Yeah. They make a note that she looks like she has the life of Luthien within her. It was as if Luthien was walking again, and then there was some kind of foreshadowing sort of between the story that God, I keep doing that. I keep saying Aragon instead of Aragorn.
One thing that has helped me separate the 2 names is saying Aragorn as as pretentiously as possible. Imagine that you're Viggo Mortensen and say it with all of the accent that he musters every time he speaks. So you have to say,
I am Aragorn. Aragorn. Or like how Orlando Bloom says it in the when he stands up all dramatically and says, "This is no mere ranger. He is Aragorn, son of Arathorn," and like really roll that R, like really hit it hard.
Don't roll it too hard, but roll it a little.
I cannot roll my R's at
Aragorn.
all.
This is Aragorn.
Aragorn.
Aragorn. Perfect. That's perfect.
Aragorn. So, yeah, Aragorn earlier in the book tells the story of Luthien and Beren, and then in the previous chapter, he has a moment, I think, with Lady Arwen, and so I was like, I wonder if that's a connection. And then we also, and then at some point in this long chapter with so many names, Elrond says, like, my mother's father was the son of Luthien. So this is confirmation of his lineage and also Arwen's lineage, that they are from Beren and Luthien, and that they were, it wasn't, because when he was telling the story earlier, I was like, I don't know if this is just like elvish folklore and just a fun story, or if these were like real people. So yeah, there's a lot of lineage talk. There's a lot of
lineage talk.
Oh my God. Like where is it? I wrote down a note about, my third note that I wrote down when started reading this chapter, I put prediction. I'm going to ride the struggle bus all the way through this chapter with all the names and places. And there's just a lot. There's a lot. And I don't even know if we're going to be able to like talk about it all in depth in this episode, because we would be here forever.
Well, names and places are so important to Tolkien, and especially when he talks about how names, how the name of a place changes. There's right after Elrond is introducing himself and his lineage, there's a paragraph here where they talk about how Minas Ithil is now called Minas Morgul. Minas Anor is now named Minas Tirith, and then he says also, what's over here, that the mountain that they used to call Orodruin is now called Mount Doom, because of all of these names, especially the Elvish names that have now been like corrupted by the Mordor, by Sauron and the people of Mordor, and that is so important to Tolkien that he dwells on it so much, because to him names are invaluable. Names give the power to a thing, and when Boromir says like, that's what happened to the ring when Isildur cut it off of the finger of whom we do not name. He doesn't say Sauron's name. He can't, and it's because
they drop
gives power to it.
Voldemort reference in there.
Exactly, because fear of a name only increases fear of the thing itself, and all that.
Actually, I highlighted. They're talking about the history of what I'm assuming are the two towers. And it says, Minas Ithil they built, Tower of the Rising Moon, eastward upon a shoulder of the Mountains of Shadow, and westward at the feet of the White Mountains, Minas Anor, Anor, sure, let's go with that. They made Tower of the Setting Sun. And then they talk about how Minas Ithil, the Tower of the Rising Moon, built on the Mountain of Shadows, was taken over by the evil people. And it's like, well, I could have predicted that. You built one on the Mountain of the Sun and one on the Mountain of the Shadows. What did you think was going to happen?
The shadows creep in, as they tend to do.
And then where is it? Yeah, Minas Ithil is renamed Minas Morgul, the Tower of Sorcery, and Minas Anor is Minas Tirith, the Tower of Guard. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Tolkien is not, he is just I don't know, like bogged down in his own details sometimes.
He is. Well, yeah, I mean, he's a historian by trade, right? Like he
It's like, oh geez, I couldn't tell from this chapter. That's essentially like a mini history lesson.
And the history doesn't even have the courtesy of being any one particular period or time or understanding of history. It just is a bunch of history. And I think it's cool
my gosh.
because it's so hard to depict like real history because that's how history actually is. There's differing accounts and differing lengths of memory and stuff like that. So the reason the dwarves know about this period and the reason the elves know about this period and the men don't know about this is interesting. It's like a cool way to tell a story, but it also doesn't lend itself to clarity, does it?
Yeah, that's putting it lightly. So I think Gloin is still talking about the dwarves.
Right, he talks about the expedition to the mines of Moria.
The other thing that's confusing with this chapter is there's so many different people. There will be like several paragraphs where it doesn't specify who is talking. So if you forget who's talking, you have to like go back up several paragraphs or turn to the previous page to be like, who is talking now? I guess it's Boromir.
Or even conversations within stories. So then you have Gandalf talking about what happened to him, but what he said and who's he, and then you're trying to figure out.
Oh my gosh. For like, I think once in the history of people who enjoy books, I feel like this chapter probably reads better on screen than it does on page.
It's a beautiful scene on screen.
Yeah, I really do think that the movie scene captures the general gist really well, though some of the little details, like this whole thing about Moria, is completely ignored. So Gloin talking about how, oh, my cousin Balin went to Moria, we're trying to reclaim the mines. A lot of our
But we haven't heard from him in so long.
It's been 30 years and nobody's gotten back to us. We're starting to worry.
You think you would have like sent a messenger by then, but whatever.
Well, Tolkien plays it fast and loose with time, though, because apparently Gandalf had 9 years of adventures, and he kind of sums it up at this meeting. But like 30 years doesn't sound that long if you're a dwarf and you live like to 200.
Yeah. And yeah, they're trying to reclaim Moria. And that's why the messenger from Mordor is like, if you give us information, you can have the rings and then you can reclaim Moria. And anyway, and so I think it's either Boromir or Gloin who says that they were given, or it says in a dream, they heard this poem or riddle.
Oh, that's a Boromir thing.
Is it Boromir? Okay,
yep.
Okay, cool.
Seek for the sword that was broken, in Imladris it dwells. There shall be counsels taken, stronger than Morgul's spells. There shall be shown a token that doom is near at hand, for Isildur's bane shall waken, and the halfling forth shall stand.
And Boromir's like, whatever could this mean? And then Aragorn stands up and is like, surprise, it me. Yeah, it says, and here in the house of Elrond, more shall be made clear to you, said Aragorn, standing up. He cast his sword upon the table that stood before Elrond, and the blade was in 2 pieces. Here's the sword that was broken, he said. And who are you, and what have you to do with Minas Tirith? Asked Boromir. He is Aragorn, son of Arathorn, said Elrond, and he is descended through many fathers from Isildur's, Elendil's son. See, this is where the names just...
Isildur. So there should be a comma there, probably. Isildur, comma, Elendil, son of Minas Ithil. So like,
that helps so much.
Elendil is Isildur's father. And
so
they were
Elendil...
Minas Ithil.
Okay.
It was a complicated story, but Elendil got his butt whooped in that big battle, but then Isildur picked up that sword.
Picked up his father's sword.
That was
broke and used that sword to cut off the finger of Sauron that had the ring on it, thus quote unquote defeating Sauron. But
or
obviously
so they thought.
Temporarily defeating Sauron.
It's like that gif of there's a huge crack in the wall and someone comes over and puts like a piece of duct tape over it.
That's enough. That'll fix it.
That'll fix it. And it worked for like 3,000 years.
Yeah, to be fair, that's a pretty good Band-Aid. Like, it worked for a while.
It did hold them. And it's funny because now we've gotten to the point where I'm like, oh, so this is the thing that I've seen so many tattoos of on Instagram. There are a lot of Lord of the Rings tattoos with the broken swords.
The
sword,
shards
and-
of Narsil.
Yeah, the blades.
Yeah.
The blade is called Narsil. Yeah, which is
And
fun.
actually, one of my earlier guests has this tattoo, and she got it. Actually, so I interned at their publishing company this time a year ago, and while I was there, she got this tattoo, and she was explaining to me like the history, and she's like, "Yeah, so this sword is all about this character's like lineage and his fate and everything that he has to live up to." And I was like, okay. Yeah.
and now it's all starting to make sense.
Yeah, which I have to say is another running theme throughout this chapter so there's been a lot of moments throughout all the episodes up until now where I've said like, I'm sure this will make sense later. Well, now things make sense later.
Now
That
is
is now.
later.
And yeah, exactly. And like in particular, there's one of the dreams that Frodo has about a man in a tower. And I was like, okay, I'm sure that's one of the two towers or something. And that's Gandalf, obviously. And I don't know if I guess he wasn't in one of the two towers. So that prediction was wrong, but
Oh, he was.
pretty much every time Frodo is like, I had a vision of a tall figure bathed in white, and I'm like, oh, okay, it was Gandalf.
It's probably Gandalf. Gandalf was trapped at the top of a tower, but Frodo had it wrong, right? Because Frodo's like, oh, I saw that. I saw you being trapped at the top of the tower in my dream. And Gandalf's like, oh, you got that vision way too late because I was gone.
I was already on it.
Yeah,
already on Shadowfax the horse, like coming back, man.
Yeah. So I guess kind of backtracking a bit. Yeah, so Aragorn kind of reveals himself, and Boromir is like, oh, so you're the king, or will be the king, I'm assuming, and you have this broken sword, and then who is the halfling? And then Bilbo says Aragorn's poem, I guess, to like prove that he really is Aragorn. I don't know. It's just kind of like, oh, and who are you? How are we supposed to believe that you're really Aragorn?
Well,
and then Bilbo says the poem, and it's like, oh, that clears things up.
Not all that is gold glitters. Or
all that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost.
And then Bilbo sits down and like nudges Frodo and is like, "You like that? Because I just came up with it.
I just wrote that." It's so good.
And so then Bilbo goes into his story and tells his side of what happened in The Hobbit, which I will read about later.
You will.
In like probably a year or so. I don't know.
It's pretty good that Bilbo has to keep apologizing for lying about this story for like 70 years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, first of all, he starts off, Gandalf is like, okay, Bilbo, I think it's time that you talk about what happened while you had the ring. And Bilbo's like, I'm kind of hungry. Can we get lunch first and then I'll talk? And Gandalf is like, Bilbo, just do it.
The faster you talk, the faster you get lunch. Now say the story.
Yeah, it is just like, it's such a Hobbit moment to be like, it's like almost 11 already. I think it's time for more food now.
That's
and
perfect.
yeah, and then he finishes, or I don't know if, I can't remember if it's as he's before he begins or when he finishes, but he says, yeah, he's like, and this may or may not sound different from what you've already heard.
And he gives
Sorry
like a good
that.
look at Gloin. He says, he's like, yeah, if you've heard it told differently, Gloin, please, I'm sorry. And Gloin specifically is sitting next to him, and Gloin was there the whole time and didn't know any of it. Like,
I know.
Gloin saw it all except for the parts where nobody saw what happened, so Bilbo could lie about it. I never really got from like the movie or from The Hobbit that Bilbo was this big of a liar. Like that he was gonna maintain this lie to everyone for so long.
Yeah, I think he kind of mentions it a little bit. I think maybe at the beginning of Fellowship when he, he's slipping the ring on his finger without telling nobody, and Frodo doesn't even really know he has it. Like they're like, yeah, I guess it's a ring or whatever, but like I don't really know where he got it, and he just and that throughout the Hobbit he lies dead to Gandalf. He looks Gandalf in the eye and is like, I found it. And that's the truth. And Gandalf goes, okay, sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Look, I
Wink,
got
wink.
other stuff going on. I can't.
Yeah, it's like, this is the least of my concerns right now. This hobbit lying about how he got this ring. We'll deal with that later. And then Frodo, so after Bilbo finished, sorry, I'm reading back in the
They
book.
speak right after another. Bilbo gets a whole paragraph here in this 30-page long chapter. Bilbo gets a paragraph and Frodo gets a paragraph to cover all of the stuff.
Which I will say,
that
I
they
am
did.
thankful that like we don't actually have to read Frodo recounting what happened because we already know what happened because it was,
Exactly.
250 pages worth of things that happened. But anyway, yeah, so when Frodo finishes talking, Bilbo says, "Not bad. You would have made a good story out of it if they hadn't kept on interrupting. I tried to make a few notes, but we shall have to go over it all again together sometime, if I am to write it up. There are whole chapters of stuff before you ever got here." "Yes, it made quite a long tale," answered Frodo. And I'm like, Tolkien, is that a fourth wall break?
Yeah, he's like, we're on page 243 here. Like,
Yeah.
there's
So
a lot of chapters.
am I going to get to the end of, what's the last one? Return of the King. And it was actually Bilbo being like, and that's the story of my nephew Frodo.
Listen,
Do you want
you,
to
you
know?
asked
Do you
us
want-
to
do
not
you want to
spoil
know?
things,
Oh, yeah. Oh,
and
yeah, you can
we
plead
can
the
tell
fifth.
you.
Pleading the fifth on this one for sure.
Yeah.
But the full title of The Hobbit is There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Tale, and
By Bilbo Baggins.
by Bilbo Baggins. So just to give you like an idea of where we're going here, of who exactly is an author self-insert and who isn't.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also like this idea that like in Bilbo's retirement he's going to be an author. So
Yeah, and he's just
That's
going to
all
write
he ever
the story.
wanted to do. All he ever wants to do is tell stories.
Yeah, he doesn't want to be a thief, you guys. He's trying to get rid of that reputation. Except I'm gonna keep lying about this magic ring.
Not anymore. Gloin.
Bilbo is, I don't know. Sometimes I love him and sometimes I'm like, you're the worst.
He's a little
just so-
extra and a bit of a disaster.
Oh my, I don't know if you have recently read the first chapter or even the first half of the first chapter, but please go back and reread Bilbo's birthday party, especially the part where he gives the speech and does a grand
so
exit. That's the way that I want to like exit. I don't know.
Anything.
Like that's how you leave a party.
My favorite part about that is that Gandalf helps, like he plays along, because Bilbo is just gonna vanish, but Gandalf like throws a firework up to like be like, boom, I'm gone. Because Gandalf is like, oh, my buddy's gonna make a dramatic exit, I better help.
Yeah, he's like, I'm here, I might as well entertain myself.
And what's so great about that scene is that he starts off so strong. He's like, hello, I'm 11D1. Thanks for coming anyways. And everybody's like, oh no. And he starts to
and he spends his entire speech passive-aggressively insulting everyone.
I like half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve.
Yeah.
Does that come out to a compliment?
Yeah. I needed to, there's some meme someone sent me recently of, it was that quote, and then there was the like meme of it's the blonde woman with like the math equations in front of her.
Yeah.
And it's like trying to figure what happened.
So good.
But I think we do get a taste of that in this meeting too. Like Bilbo's like, I'm gonna stand up and do poetry when you least expect it. And everybody's like, that's our Bilbo. And the difference between this and his party is that these guys are adventuring types who like him, and everybody at the party tolerates him because, again, he is kind of mega rich, and he's finally among his people. So this is where doing poetry in the middle of some dude being like, who are you even, like, actually works.
Yeah.
So this is a different kind of society. Bilbo belongs with these guys, I think. And I think that's why he feels emboldened at the end and stands up, because he's like, yeah, calling out old Bilbo again. I get it. Because it works for him. He likes it here.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, so then they hold up the ring, gasp, big reveal. Except for Boromir, who is getting annoying at this point in the chapter, at least for me. He's like, but how do we know that's the ring? And
how do we know you're Aragorn, son of Arathorn?
Yeah, how do we know all this?
And that's what Gandalf's story was really good for, when he talks about making it to just like the next page, makes it to Minas Tirith, and he goes into the archives and everything, and he reads Isildur's firsthand account of how to identify the ring. So Gandalf gets to step up and be like, hi, I'm a wizard. I know everything. I've read the firsthand accounts, and I've known Aragorn since he was a kid. Just trust me on this one. And Boromir can sit back and go, oh, okay.
Oh.
All right.
Yeah. And it's also at this point that we finally learn a bit about what Gandalf was doing. I think it's in between chapter 1 and 2. It's either 17 or 19 years pass, and then Gandalf shows up. And all we know is that in that time, Gandalf has been doing research about the ring. And so this is where we learn about what some of that research was. And yeah, he reads the scroll, and then it's just, for the entire first half of the book, so much has been left unclear, and we're in the dark about everything, and Gandalf is almost essentially useless. And I don't know, just utter confusion and chaos. And you're like, Gandalf, couldn't you have explained things a little bit better? So it's finally nice to get some explanation and, put together all the pieces and be like, okay, this is the picture we're looking at. At this point, it's not a great picture, but at least we have the pieces.
Yeah.
And then we also learned that Gandalf had enlisted Aragorn to help capture Gollum, or go after Gollum and look for him. And I don't know, I guess I just don't understand why they felt the need to imprison him if he doesn't have the ring. Because I feel like Gollum can't possibly be dangerous since he doesn't have the ring anymore. He's just, he may not be a nice person, but, why imprison him?
Well...
I feel like I want to plead the fifth, but I also want to kind of, I think their reasoning, they might even mention it here, their reasoning being, if Gollum's in the wrong hands, they can get more information out of, if Sauron gets a hold of Gollum, they're going to torture him for information they don't want Sauron to have.
Okay, cool.
Is what because it says, but it is beyond all doubt that Gollum went to Mordor, and there all that he knew was forced from him. Thus the enemy knows now that the one is found and that it is long in the Shire. And so he does say, we were trying to get to Gollum before Sauron could, but Sauron got to him, and that's why the Nine knew where to find Frodo.
Yeah, he's definitely still important, and I think there's still some of Gandalf that thought that maybe Gollum could be cured, because I know that's what Legolas said, right? He's like, we watched him night and day, we kept guards on him, and we never put him underground because we knew that would be bad for him, and we put him in trees and stuff, and we were just trying to rehabilitate this dude, and it did not work out.
Where is it? Yeah, he says, first, backtracking a bit, Legolas jumps in the conversation, is like, so, this might be a good time to bring up that Gollum has escaped.
Yeah.
And why would you not mention that sooner? I feel like that would be some pretty important information if Gandalf and Aragorn were the ones involved in getting Gollum there. I feel like you should open with that. That's a conversation starter for sure.
Hey guys, so before anything else about listen, we were given a job, it didn't listen. We're attacked. It was an ambush.
Ambush. My favorite part about this Legolas section here is when Gloin pops in with, when you put us in jail, you put us underground and treated us bad. That's the funniest thing.
That's actually what that's what I was about to read. It says, this is Legolas talking right now. It says, but Gandalf bade us hope still for his cure, and we had not the heart to keep him ever in dungeons under the earth, where he would fall back into his old black thoughts. You were less tender to me, said Gloin with a flash of his eyes. And then Gandalf is like, all right. We're going to be here for a while if we start bringing up the sordid past and history of elves and dwarves. So.
Except we are already here for a while, Gandalf. Like, this was a jab.
Ages.
I know.
It was a solid jab, too, because... that's Hobbit talk.
I was going to say, I'm assuming that happens at some point in The Hobbit.
Yes, and it's very
dwarves
good.
Are captured and something isn't good or treated nicely. So
it's just a waylaid adventure. They get taken off of their adventure path for just a minute to get imprisoned by the elves.
It's just a short prison stay in a basement, guys. It's not that bad.
And it was Legolas's dad who threw them in, and it's a solid part of the story. But that's one of the things that I really appreciate about Tolkien in general is the ability for him. I mean, there's a lot going on, but he keeps it all straight and very consistent. Because if Legolas had mentioned the dungeons and Gloin hadn't said anything, I would have been like, hey, Gloin, you wanna jump in there about your prison stay? Or
sounds pretty good. You didn't get to climb trees while you were in prison. That's all I'm saying.
No, you did not.
Yeah, I will say that Tolkien does do a pretty decent job of when he does drop in those Easter eggs and, hints at the Hobbit, he does do a good job of like, if you read The Hobbit, you'll understand this and you'll get it more. If you haven't read The Hobbit, here's enough context for you to understand what this means at this moment. Like, it's not anything where like, there have been a couple times where I'm like, I'm assuming I'll get more clarity on this in The Hobbit, but it's not a big deal if I don't know about it right now. So he is very, imagine that epiphany. Tolkien is a good writer, y'all.
I know we have spent a little bit of time criticizing, but I think it's because there are idiosyncrasies to his writing that are kind of easy to criticize. But at the same time, these are some of the greatest, most popular stories ever told. And I think this is partially why, is that the world's so cohesive.
And this chapter is hard to read in its length and its density, but the sentences are, everybody talks so beautifully. Gandalf's story, when he is telling, that's the very next thing I think that happens, is that Gandalf goes into this tale and every sentence reads like poetry. It's so gorgeous. And that's why it's when you're like, oh, Tolkien, like, what are you doing with all this, with all these crazy things you pull? But then you turn the page and you read this gripping tale of the fall of Sauron in poetry. And it's beautiful.
Yeah,
it's a great chapter.
I'm flipping through. I think there's like an entire passage that Gandalf says that I just highlighted to be like, okay, read this out loud. Yeah, so Gandalf is like, oh, Gollum's escaped. I mean, he may or may not be a part of Sauron's bigger plan, but honestly, we don't really have time for that right now. So, okay, moving on. And then he launches into his tale of why the F he was gone for the entire first half of the book when he said he would be there with Frodo. And because up until now, all we learned is that Gandalf, the reason he didn't return to the Shire to go with Frodo and gang to leave the Shire is because he received urgent news of some kind and couldn't go back. And we learn what that urgent news is. And then when Frodo wakes up, all he says is, I was held captive, and that's all I'll say right now, and you'll learn soon enough. Well, now we gonna learn you today, boy. A lot of what happened to Gandalf.
This scene with Saruman is amazing. I love everything about it. It's scary and a little funny. I really like the part where Gandalf says, Saruman's like, oh, well, then I'll just keep you here. And Gandalf's like, oh yeah, I'd like to see you try. And Saruman's like, I would win.
Yeah. He's like, okay, I will try and I will win.
It would be really easy for me.
Yeah, so a messenger catches up with Gandalf and says, the Nine are abroad again, and the enemy is near. Enemies of the air, beware. And then he's like, oh, I'll go to Saruman. And then we get there. And also, I feel betrayed because he's Saruman the White. And up until now, Tolkien has been, like, he is not subtle in his use of descriptive language or just common symbolism and tropes and stuff. And up until now, anything that has been light or white is good, and anything that's dark or black is bad. And then we get here to Saruman the White, and he's turned dark, y'all. Plot twist.
Plot twist.
And I actually had to I went back to try and reread this because I'm like, am I just dumb? Or is Saruman not on his side right now?
I think there's really good language in there to kind of subvert that trope that he set up so far, right? Because, like, you're right, Tolkien's really unsubtle about this, but I think he's doing a little bit of self-critique here with Saruman and being like, the white page can be written on, the white cloth can be dyed. Saruman was easily corruptible because of this supposed purity, which never existed in the first place. And I think that's what makes this moment so good. I think that's why it affected you so deeply, because, like, I knew it was coming, and even I was like, oh wow, that's really good language that never made it into the movie. And it really explains why he turned in that visual language that Tolkien's so famous for.
Yeah, so Gandalf shows up, and Saruman kind of gets a little dig at him and says, it has seldom been heard of Gandalf the Grey sought for aid, one so cunning and so wise, wandering about the lands, and concerning himself in every business, whether it belongs to him or not. And I was like, ooh, I don't know if there's like some previous beef between Saruman and Gandalf, or if this is just like Gandalf's reputation in general. But at that moment, I was like, I do not foresee this conversation going well.
It's definitely Gandalf's reputation. I mean, there might be previous beef, but like, I'll put this in vague terms so it's not a spoiler, but there's definitely a point in the Two Towers where he rolls up to somebody who is like, oh my God, you again. Like, you always come here meddling in other people's business. Like go away, Gandalf. So it's definitely a common thread when people talk about Gandalf.
Among the other wizards, I think even he's seen as somebody who's like way too active. The wizards are supposed to be really hands off. They're supposed to like take care of their business, and everybody else is supposed to kind of like listen to them or go to them for advice, but not. The wizards are not supposed to actively intervene. They're definitely not supposed to like conquer a nation or raise an army. So Saruman's like really in the bad there. But like Radagast, who was the messenger that Gandalf was talking to, he's just like nature boy. He's basically Tom Bombadillo light. And like he's just a
nature boy.
He just loves talking to animals and like pretending to be an animal, changing shape to be an animal. You know, he's just an animal guy. He likes the animals. And like Tom Bombadil's the same way, even though he's not really a wizard. But like these great powers are supposed to be hands off. They're not supposed to meddle. And Gandalf always does. He's always like, I heard there was a dragon. What if we fought it? Like he's always... And
also like just the fact that he goes and I mean the introduction we have to Gandalf in this book is he's in Hobbiton and he's doing the fireworks show for the hobbits. And he helps Bilbo with his great escape with the little burst
with the pyrotechnic.
Yeah. He's like, I know that we're supposed to not do this, but I think it would be more fun for me personally if I just, messed with the hobs a little bit.
And he's the only one that cares about the hobbits at all. He's the only one that studied their lore, so he's like very much involved with the people of Middle-earth, where the rest of the wizards just aren't.
It really reminds me so much of Dumbledore, and Dumbledore sees so much worth and value in talking to the Centaurs or making sure that the house elves in Hogwarts are well taken care of, and being a kind of friend between different races and peoples, because he knows that it's not just wizards and then everyone else. It's all a part of this magical world. And I just love Dumbledore a lot.
Dumbledore speaks Mermish. Like, that's cool.
Yeah. And it's so similar. They're just so similar because Dumbledore is also thought of like, oh, he's just the kooky old wizard who, like he eats muggle candy and people think that's weird, and he sees value in understanding things from the muggle world.
Yeah, and Gandalf smokes pipeweed with the hobbits, and Saruman Saruman calls him out for it. Like you just all you do is smoke and eat and hang out with hobbits. Like, what's your problem?
I mean, that sounds like a pretty good time to me.
But I want to be a hobbit so bad.
So he shows up with Saruman, and I love that you pointed out the use of how white can be changed, because now I see Gandalf notices, it says, I looked then and saw that his robes, which had seemed white, were not so, but were woven of all colors. And if he moved, they shimmered and changed hues so that the eye was bewildered. Oh, and then Gandalf goes, I liked white better, I said.
So sassy. He knows he's outclassed. And
Saruman's like, I am of many colors. And Gandalf's like, I think white looked better, but okay.
But all right.
All right. Like, it's so Gandalf good. Knowing, like, I'm not getting out of this, like, on my own terms, so I'm going to sass him just a little.
Yeah. If I'm going to be here, I'm going to be sassy about it. And then Saruman says, a new power is rising. Against it, the old allies and policies will not avail us at all. There is no hope left in elves or dying, oh boy, it's a word, Numenor.
Numenor.
Numenor, did I say that correctly?
He's like the original man.
Okay, that's what I thought.
The people of Numenor, the Numenorians are. Numenor is a region, like a place that the race of men kind of like sprung from. Aragorn is a direct descendant of the people of Numenor.
Okay, cool. That's what I thought. It's always good and affirming to hear that, like, I think I know what's happening here, so it's good to hear confirmation that, like, yes, I am able to read at a basic reading comprehension level.
No, yeah, yes. You're crushing it.
So he says, there is no hope left in elves or dying Numenor. This, then, is one choice before us. We may join with that power. It would be wise, Gandalf. There is hope that way. So basically, this is where we learn that Saruman is like, I'm going to join forces with evil and get the ring for myself. And Gandalf is like, you fool, that's not really how this is going to work. Like, if you join forces with Sauron, he's not just going to give you a ring to co-host evil with him. Like, he says, like, why not? The ruling ring, if we could command that, then the power would pass to us. And again, that's just not what would happen at all.
And I was in this moment waiting for Gandalf to say the line from the movie, which is, there is only one Lord of the Rings.
And he does not share power.
Wait, he says that, sorry, I've got to flip back. I think he says that in the previous
chapter.
Oh, no way.
There is only one Lord of the Ring. Yeah, he says the thing. He says the title of the thing.
Oh, yeah.
So the movie title.
Yeah, it's actually in the previous chapter. It's after Frodo wakes up and he walks out to see his friends and says, hooray, cried Pippin, springing up. Here is our noble cousin. Make way for Frodo, Lord of the Ring. Hush, said Gandalf from the shadows at the back porch. Evil things do not come into this valley, but all the same, we should not name them. The Lord of the Ring is not Frodo, but the master of the Dark Tower of Mordor, whose power is again stretching out over the world. So he doesn't say there is only one, but he does say, yeah, they do say the title of the book, or almost the title of the book.
Love when they drop that book title.
Yeah.
They do it once. They do it. He says in once per film, he does say, it says, you shall be the Fellowship of the Ring, the Union of the Two Towers, and it says, and then he says something about, and then we shall welcome the return of the king. Like, literally in each film, they say the title of the film in it.
Nice.
It's so good.
Nice. I do remember being a young child watching Sorcerer's Stone, like in the movie theater. And when the children discover what it is that's being kept hidden in Hogwarts, they all like look at each other and they're like, the Sorcerer's Stone. And like let's see, how old was I then? I don't know.
Just
8?
like the
2001.
movie title.
I don't remember. And I was like, oh my God, they said it.
Yeah, it's nice when they say it.
And so when he didn't say it in the book at that moment, I was devastated, and I had to stop listening and take a break so that I could cry it out a little, because that's a really good line.
Yeah, so Gandalf is then captured, and where are they actually?
So they're in Isengard, which is
they're at Orthanc Tower in Isengard.
Okay,
it's near. If you have the map, they're by Rohan. It's in the south.
In my version of the book, there is only a tiny version of the Shire, and then at the back there's a map that is. Oh wait, here we go. I need a like large print. You know how there are some editions of books that are made with like giant fonts?
Yes.
That's what I need for the map of Middle-earth.
So if you have the map called the West of Middle-earth, it's divided into four quadrants here.
Yeah.
There's a line of mountains, and right at the base of that line of mountains is Isengard. It's like right in the dead center. So if you ride up parallel from Isengard, up parallel along the mountains, you run into Rivendell. So it's a pretty good distance.
This is some great conversation for an auditory podcast.
For a podcast, yeah.
Listeners,
find a map and follow along.
Yeah. It doesn't even have to be a map of Middle-earth. Just pick a map, any map, and find some mountains. So Gandalf mentions that he was kept in a tower and there was very little room for him to pace. And this is where Frodo jumps in and says, I saw you. You were walking backwards and forwards. And I like how he adds this note, the moon shone in your hair.
Aww.
And Gandalf looks at him and Frodo's like, I mean, it was a dream, but I don't know. It just
Gandalf's like, you were there. You didn't help.
Yeah. And I guess Gandalf is like, let me see. Yeah, all he says is, well, I mean, that dream didn't really do me much help because at that point I was already trapped. But so I guess Gandalf is like, interesting revelations here. You have dreams about things that are happening currently to me. I wonder what that'll mean in the future. So I wrote, my next note is, did Tolkien grow up on a farm or something? Because he talks a lot about horses.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, Gandalf getting his horse. I forgot about that scene and how much I liked it until you mentioned this. Because like, Gandalf's like, oh yeah, then the eagle rescued me. Totally awesome.
Oh yeah.
Flies around.
Quick side note, giant eagle came, rescued him. Cool beans.
It doesn't need much more explanation than that. And frankly, we never get any more than that. Just like the Eagles owed me one.
There's also some Hobbit reference in there as well. The Eagles make a Hobbit appearance. But one of my favorite passages in this whole chapter is Gandalf describing his horse, Shadowfax.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful. By day,
prince
his
of
coat,
all horses.
It's the prince of all horses. By day, his coat glistens like silver, and by night it is like a shade, and he passes unseen. Light is his footfall. Never before had any man mounted him, but I took him and I tamed him. And like, I just, tireless, swift as the flowing wind. Like, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful imagery about
horses are so majestic and wonderful creatures, and Shadowfax is the best one. And that's just true.
Best.
Actually.
Yeah, he just spends a lot of time in this book there's a lot of time dedicated to ponies.
Horses are always getting complimented in this book so far.
Well, and the other thing is that in an earlier chapter, all the riders scare off all of the horses and other, like, I guess, cows and other they use the word beasts, but anyway, and they get scared off. And at some point in the chapter, Tolkien gives an update on like what happened to the horses. And you learn that like the horses eventually found their way back to Tom Bombadil, and they're all being taken care of, and they're with the other horse, Fatty Lumpkins.
Oh yeah.
And there are so many words in this book, and Tolkien took a paragraph of those words to give us a horse update.
I think a lot of this comes from Tolkien is he was a World War I vet, and in World War I, horses were extremely important as not just like beasts of burden, but as tools and like companions throughout World War I. That plus he did grow up in the countryside outside Birmingham, I believe, and I think he does have a very special kinship to nature and to horses specifically.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up that he was a World War I vet, because my previous guest points out that some, not criticisms or I guess reviews or something, when people like analyze Lord of the Rings, they make a lot of comparisons to World War I and how it was, before there was a World War II, it was known as the Great War because it was the biggest war anyone in the world had ever seen. And it's either this chapter or the previous one, Gandalf calls what's happening now the War of the Ring. And it sounds very ominous and scary, and it only makes sense that that Tolkien would kind of write about what happened to him and the world and everything through this form of media, I guess.
Yeah. Tolkien has resisted, had resisted that reading. Like, he's like, oh, it's not really about my experience in war. It's just a good story I wanted to tell. Which kind of raises the question of like death of the author, and like, well, it's pretty clear that there's themes about war in here, right? And even if he didn't mean to put them in, like, here they are.
They're still there.
It's definitely an important part of his psyche.
Oh yeah,
for sure.
It's so great that you bring that up, because that's exactly what my previous guest said. That
nice.
That
awesome.
Tolkien was adamant about, like, this isn't about World War One, and everyone else was like, I mean,
it's
have
quite a lot.
Have you read it? Have you read your own books? Anyway, so as Gandalf is riding on this illustrious creature of a horse called, what's his name?
Shadowfax. So he rides Shadowfax and he makes it back to Bree, but Frodo's already gone, right?
Why did I put my hopes with the innkeeper?
Yeah.
What was I thinking?
Yeah. So on his ride there, where is it? Because he makes some dumb comment about, like, his name is Butterbur, so I will roast his butter.
I will roast the old fool over a slow fire.
It says.
He's so good.
Yeah, and he's thinking, like, I wonder if Butterbur ever got that note to the Shire, which, spoiler alert, he didn't. And he says, Butterbur, they call him, thought I. If this delay was his fault, I will melt all the butter in him. I will roast the old fool over a slow fire, which I was looking forward to immensely, because I was so frustrated, and like, that's the reason why Gandalf isn't here? Are you telling me that's why we're in all this trouble? As you can tell, I'm getting worked up again. Anyway, and so I was like, I was really looking forward to the roasting of Barlaman Butterbur, or Butterbur Barlaman. I don't remember his...
Barlaman Butterbur. Such a ridiculous man. I
have to force myself to say Butterbur, because my Harry Potter brain replaces it with Butterbeer.
Butterbeer.
Yeah.
Barlaman Butterbeer.
And anyway, and so he gets there, and Butterbur is like crying, and he's like, I'm so sorry, I forgot. And Gandalf feels bad and is like, okay, I won't roast you, fine. Oh my gosh. So that's when we find out that Gandalf, at this point in the story, Gandalf is like a day behind the hobbits and Aragorn, because at this point Aragorn and the hobbits had just left that morning. This is where I'm kind of like, I feel like the plot and their paths don't really track or line up, because so basically I was like, well, if Gandalf was like a day behind them. Wouldn't he have caught up to them at some point? At some point, he gets ahead of them, and it's because he's on horseback and the hobbits don't have horses at that point. I love it when I answer my own questions. So,
look, just print the map and follow along, guys.
yeah.
Because he leaves the symbol on Weathertop. He leaves his little thing that's like, hey, I was here. If you're on your way, you're going the right way, kind of thing.
Yeah, and he gets there, and I believe he gets attacked by or surrounded by riders. And this is once again where it was in, I guess, chapter 10 or 11. At this point, from the Hobbit's perspective, they see like a flash of lightning happening in the background, and I was like, okay, that's probably Gandalf. And then here it is. It was Gandalf. So I mean, so far I'm doing pretty good with like whenever they reference lightning or white being like mysterious, I'm like, it's probably Gandalf. So.
It's probably Gandalf.
And then he kind of leads some of the riders off the Hobbit's trail, so that there's only 5 of them when they attack the hobbits instead of all 9 of them. And then we eventually catch up to the point that we are at now. And then they bring up our good old man, Tom Bombadil.
Why isn't he here? He could fix this.
Because he's hanging out with Goldberry, his beautiful wife.
Yes.
He would not do it.
And all the ponies and Fatty Lumpkins.
I love that Tolkien wrote himself into a corner with this character that's like unbelievably old, unimaginably powerful, immune to the ring. He's like, well, he can't. He won't.
He just doesn't
he
want to.
Don't wanna.
Yes. Oh my god. Yes. So in the Tom Bombadil chapter, I was like, why doesn't Tom Bombadil just go with them? I was like, I feel like Tom Bombadil will be a great character to have around at some point in the future. And the person who was on that episode was just like, Tom Bombadil is his own thing. He is his own, like, he is in his own world, and everyone else is just living in it. And we just learn more about, we just get a lot more information that adds to the folklore that is Tom Bombadil. And Elrond says, so like, oh, I knew him by another name that meant oldest and fatherless. Mm-hmm. And he names like all, and he says, he is a strange creature, but maybe I should have summoned him to our council. He would not have come, said Gandalf. And I'm like, that... Like, throughout the chapter, they're like, but, I mean, could we at least send him a note and see what he says? And Gandalf is like, trust me, he wouldn't come.
He won't.
He won't roll up.
But this is something that Tolkien gets a lot, and it not just about Tom Bombadil. And, like, there are things that could fix the problem that don't happen because then the story wouldn't happen, right? Like, why don't they just call the police in the haunted house? Because then there wouldn't be a story.
It wouldn't be a horror movie. Right. It's a big criticism that gets thrown at Tolkien a lot. But what about this very simple solution? And it's like, well, you're ignoring the histories that Tolkien's laying out, and like he tries to give you very good reasons why the simple version doesn't work. But also, it's a story. Like, you want story.
Let's hear how the stories go, or how the characters go on a fun quest instead of just this really easy thing where the superpower guy saves the day. Yeah,
and so they ask, like, they're like, well, if the ring didn't affect Tom Bombadil, because back in the Tom Bombadil chapter, he picks up the ring and puts it on, and
nothing happens.
I don't remember if he actually puts it on or if he just like a sleight of hand magic trick with it. Like it's a quarter and not an evil ring.
Treats it like it's nothing.
Yeah, and so the fact that he is not affected by the ring at all, they're like, well, why don't we just give it to him and keep it in the old forest that he commands, and it'll be safe there. And they make the point that that's just putting another Band-Aid on the situation. It's not a permanent fix. And then Elrond says this epic line. Now, at last, this we must take a hard road, a road unforeseen. There lies our hope, if hope it be, to walk into peril, to Mordor, we must send the ring to the fire.
Yes.
Heck yeah.
So good.
They just kind of keep going back and forth between like, well, we can't destroy it because we don't have enough powers here to do that, and we can't send it elsewhere. And so what do? The solution is to walk into Mordor, which, as we know, one does not simply walk into Mordor.
You can't just. and Boromir has this bright idea right about here where he's like, but what if we used it? And they're like, Boromir,
yeah,
who invited you to this? You're not important enough.
Yeah, gosh, Boromir.
We can't, and it should be obvious why not.
They're like, I mean, technically, yeah, we could, but the ring corrupts whoever has it, and all it would do is make one of us evil, and then you would have to defeat that person, and then that person would become evil. We just need to destroy the source of the evil.
Yeah, just end the cycle.
Pretty sure Gandalf... It's probably Gandalf, honestly. Yep, it's Gandalf. Yeah, Gandalf says, we should seek a final end of this menace, even if we do not hope to make one. Basically, they're all like, these are the times that try men's souls.
Yeah, basically, essentially, we're learning here that, because we've been following the hobbits for so long, who don't know, but this war... This is not the beginning of the War of the Ring. We are in the middle of the War of the Ring. People are already fighting and dying and being tortured about this ring. And it's time now that everybody steps up. It's time now to do the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's go do the thing. Yeah, and Airsource says something about like, we are either leading ourselves to doom or this is just ridiculousness. And Gandalf says, I just really liked this quote. How we were talking earlier about how like he kind of talks in poetry just all the time. Mm-hmm. He says, despair or folly, it is not despair, for despair is only for those who see the end beyond all doubt. We do not. It is wisdom to recognize necessity when all other courses have been weighed. Though as folly it may appear to those who cling to false hope. Well, let folly be our cloak, a veil before the eyes of the enemy. I love that.
It's
let
so
folly
gorgeous.
Be our cloak. You're like, yeah, he's like, yeah, this is absurd and kind of ridiculous, but like at this point, absurd and ridiculous is what we have to go on.
And absurd and ridiculous is all that can work, because if it sounds so ridiculous it couldn't possibly work, then they're going to be able to sneak it through. And that's I think why the obvious answers will not work for Tolkien. He's like, no, because they'd stop that somehow.
Yeah.
The real answer is the absurd one.
Yeah. Like they say they can't go west because the elves have been known to flee west, and then they can't go back east towards the Shire and all these. And they basically just start narrowing it down. And they're like, basically the only path is to Mordor.
We shall see what happens to our heroes. Boy, howdy.
Yeah.
I bet it's a smooth, short journey that has no struggles.
It'll be over real quick. Yeah. So they're like, all right, this was started by a halfling. I guess it has to end by a halfling. And yeah, like we were talking about before, this is when Bilbo's like, all right, I get it. I see what you're getting at. And they're like, no, not at all. And then Frodo volunteers as tribute.
That's that is my favorite passage in this chapter. It's separated in my copy, at least. It's kind of set on its own. The paragraphs don't tend to have a lot of like breaks between them. It's not like a lot of paragraph breaks, but here on its own, this paragraph is set aside where Frodo, this is my favorite, the line here, a great dread fell on him as if he was awaiting the pronouncement of some doom that he had long foreseen and vainly hoped might, after all, never be spoken. An overwhelming longing to rest and remain at peace by Bilbo's side in Rivendell filled all his heart. At last, with an effort, he spoke and wondered to hear his own words as if some other will was using his small voice. I will take the ring, he said, though I do not know the way. I adore that passage and the like super quiet bravery that Frodo has where he people hate on Frodo a lot. You'll discover the further into this fandom you get, the more crap that people give Frodo. But this is such a beautiful moment where he feels the dread and he feels the fear and he accepts it anyways. And I think that's just incredible.
I'm reminded of a line from Newsies that says, courage does not erase our fears. Courage is when we face our fears.
Nice.
Aw,
I know, isn't that
that's
a
a really
very
good line.
Yeah, it is a great line. Newsies is a great musical. I recommend it. Anyway, that's when Sam jumps up. Which, by the way, it's like, oh, did you remember Sam? Neither did I.
Oh, so cute. He's like, you're not going to go without
dropping
me,
eaves.
right?
He says, but you won't send him off alone, surely, master. And I love Elrond's response is like, no, he's not going alone because you're going too. And then Sam says, a nice pickle we have landed ourselves in, Mr. Frodo.
So
That is-
cute.
That is the
End of chapter.
Of chapter 2, book 2, The Council of Elrond. Holy cow, y'all.
I cannot believe that's the end. It sounds like the end of, to go back to sitcoms, it sounds like the end of a sitcom. Like, oops we goop. And then the theme song would start playing.
They do a Saved by the Bell, like jump in the air,
This is
high five, freeze frame.
A Seinfeld bass line plays as they shrug into the camera.
And then the credits roll, and then we pick up next week and all is well, and they're back in the Shire.
Yes, but honestly, now that we're through the council, the number of characters that you've met, most of them are not important anymore. There are so
wave goodbye to Glorfindel,
Bye,
for a
Glorfindel.
long
You're
time.
kidding.
Glorfindel, by Aristor, by Gloin, these guys.
These guys do not
That's
matter.
They're
annoying.
gonna.
That's
I mean, they're only important while we're in Rivendell.
Yeah, I was gonna say, going back to like our sitcom references here, like it's like when there's an entire episode they take to dedicate to like a random side character who shows up for an episode, and then you never see them again, and you're like, well, why did we waste an entire episode revolving around that character? Well, that brings us to the end of this, but I'm sure is probably going to be a much longer episode than usual. Holy cow, that's a lot, and we didn't even like go into all of it either. Like there's a lot that I like skimmed over. But
Yeah.
Anyway, what would you guys like to plug?
You can find us on Twitter at Happy Places Pod is the official show Twitter.
Yeah, and we're always on Twitter. You can find me at buddy_Duquesne. Duquesne is spelled DUQUESNE.
And I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Alice White THP for Those Happy Places. We're also you can go to thosehappyplaces.com and find all of the episodes and stuff like that. It's a lot of fun to make and a lot of fun to do.
That's What I'm Talking About is a production of Bacon and Eggs. You can learn more about them by going to baconandeggs.media. The cover art is by Graphite, aka Vaishon Brandon. You can support him on Instagram at graphite.vmb. You can find the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at TolkienAboutPod. You can find me on Twitter at MCWatt416 and Instagram at MCTurnedDownForWatt. If you like what you're listening to, please rate and review. I've always forget to say this, and now I'm remembering it because when I go back and see that someone has left a review or a rating, it just makes me so happy. So please do that if you want to be nice. If you're going to be mean, then don't do it. And then also, finally, I want to show my thanks and appreciation for all of you who are listening right now in the beginning of this thing and supporting me in these first couple episodes. And if you are interested in receiving a surprise in the mail, please follow the link in the episode description. Oh, that's a lot of announcements. And now I'm done. So with that being said, do you guys have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Nothing except thank you so much for having us on this show. We had a really great time. I personally have not read Lord of the Rings in forever. Like I said, this is the chapter that stopped me. So I'm actually back into it, and I'm going to be a Lord of the Rings fan from now on.
Nice.
And I had a really good time preparing and recording for the episode. So I can't wait to share it with everybody when it comes out.
Yeah, this is really fun. Thank you.
And that's what I'm talking about.